Hello YouTube, Robin Hood Bricks here, or should I say, ahoy mateys, because today I'm going to be building a ship using this rather large hull piece. Okay, well the hull that I've chosen for today's boat build is this 51 stud long and 12 stud wide hull, which is a really good size, so we should be able to fit quite a lot of good stuff on this. And I've gone for a red one, and that's because they're quite readily available, because LEGO have used red hulls throughout the years in doing countless fire boats, though I've never really seen a fire boat in real life, I don't think, apart from in LEGO form, and they definitely aren't that common in the UK, so I'm not going to do a fire boat, but I am going to make use of this lovely red colour, which sadly is missing the stickers from the set it came from, 7906 Fireboat, which would have been quite good to have, the stripes. I could have just chopped off the fire logo, but alas not. And that was quite a good set actually. It seemed to have a motor that you could clip on the bottom of this boat. You clip it on here, because these hulls can actually float. So maybe I should do a float test once we've finished. And see how this looks on real water. I don't know. The amount it's raining at the moment outside, I could almost just do that out of my front door. Good. So there is the hull, and that's a good contrast from the blue colour that is my City Lines big container ship, the 7994, and it's also a good contrast from the green one, which is my Farm Lines container vessel 4645. Actually, that's a bulk vessel, isn't it? And that's the one with the sort of ridges or sort of bulges on the side as well. So this is a unique hull in a unique colour. So I need to do a unique purpose for it. And two things that I've been collecting over the recent weeks and months in brick halls is fishermen, specifically fisherman torsos, because you can get the flamish orange legs through bricks and pieces, and then you just need a beanie hat or one of these newer fisherman's hats and a face, typically with a beard on, I find. So I always think they look better with a beard, a bit more like working men. So that's good. So I've got loads of them and absolutely loads of crabs. So I don't think I'll do a normal fish fishing boat. I think I'll do a crab fishing boat. Now, this is sort of going to be loosely inspired on one of the many crab boats on the programme Deadliest Catch, which is a great show if you haven't seen it, on the Discovery Channel on the UK, I think. And it follows about 6 of these boats in the very, very cold waters of the North Pacific off Alaska, catching king crab. And it's a very, very hard job. They're in incredibly low temperatures and with blowing gales and spray from the sea, very rough seas, and it just looks absolutely awful. You wouldn't catch me doing that for 1 minute, and they're doing it for sort of 22-hour shifts at a time and things. It looks awful, but at least they bring in an absolute load of money in doing so. So I'm going to try and create one of those, but I'm going to do it in my normal sort of Legoized style. I'm not going to try and make an accurate representation of one of those boats because, well, there probably just wouldn't be room for a start. I'm not going to have bunks for all these guys, or an engine room, or a kitchen, or a toilet, or probably fencing. But what I am going to do is have all the main sort of deck features, so it does actually look like a fair representation of a crab boat, and you can immediately tell what it is. So another thing, when I thought about this a bit more, that I want to do is vary the position of the wheelhouse, i.e. the cabin. Now, the majority of boats have it on the back, and they do on that programme, and they do on the 2 sets I mentioned already elsewhere in my harbour. But I want to have the wheelhouse on this boat on the front. And that is a variation that does happen on one of the boats there, called the Northwestern. And it's just a different style of doing it, really, but it does give the captain in the bridge a better sort of navigational view from the front of the boat, and also the waves crashing against the bow, because they are in very deep seas, will hit largely the wheelhouse first and thus protect the working crew behind to some extent. So I thought, yep, I'm going to do that. I'm going to have the wheelhouse on the front for a bit of variety. though I'm not trying to represent the northwestern specifically. I mean, that's sort of white with a blue trim. This is red. So it's just really that positioning, I think, that I'm going to try and echo. Right, so I think my first step is to try and segregate some of the areas into different purposes, because I think I'm going to need sort of, say, so much for a wheelhouse, and then I'm going to have so much more for a hold underneath the deck, and then maybe a second hold, and then the rear area as well. And I want to do that because I want to use a lot of these crabs on the deck like this, but then with kind of a mesh roof on top, because that's what happens. Once they catch the crab, they do pour them into large water tanks within the vessel. So what I want us to be able to see, kind of through some gaps, is loads and loads of crab in the hold that have already been caught. Now, it's not that usually you can see them so vividly because they've got hatches on top, but that's what I want to do here. So I'm going to kind of have a fake deck here, because it would go all the way to the bottom for the crabs, and try and layer on as much of those as I can before having kind of a mezzanine deck as low on top of those as possible, which will probably be 1 brick height, so we can see the bright yellowish orange colour of them through the gaps. And then hopefully I can start building much more of the deck features that we'd expect to see on a crab boat. So I'm going to get on with that. Right, so this is the setup I've decided on. I've used 2x8 black bricks just to segregate the different areas, with a little variation here for reasons that will become clear soon. And I've filled these 2 sections with crab. This section will probably be underneath the wheelhouse or the superstructure. And I've done 1 tank very full and 1 tank slightly less full. And I've made this layer 1 brick deep, partially because it uses fewer pieces, but partially because each of these crabs, although they're only actually 2 plates thick, to have them looking really sort of overlapping and full, then I do have to mount a couple. You might be able to see this one and another one are actually mounted on an orange round plate, just to make them a little bit higher, so we can get that pleasing sort of overlapping, very full up sort of thing going on. And that means that it obviously takes 1 more plate, so it's actually the full 3 plates deep. So then I can start to cover this. So I'm going to use a 1x8 and a 6x8 just to cover up that bit. So that's just regular decking underneath the wheelhouse. And then I'm going to use these pieces, the 8x8, with this sort of lattice work on, so we can see into our crab tanks. So that looks pretty good if you ask me. We can see all those crab because they're nice and bright, which makes it a lot easier. So when we've got these guys sort of working on the floor above, I think you'll still be able to see them there, because we're going to have loads of crabs on the deck as well in the process of being put in these tanks. So that looks good. So I've got another one of those for this area. If I've done it right, those ones that are raised will fit right in those lattice spaces. So that's good to see. So that one does look really full, especially from an angle. You can sort of see their crabs. I mean, it's a bit of a waste of crabs, but they aren't that expensive. You can get them for about 10p each. So I think that's worth it for the effect. I won't put any more down there because that really would be a waste. And then this section I'm going to come back to in a moment, and I'm just going to put a normal 8x8 on the back there, because that's where I'm going to have some of the big crab pots being stored. So back to this area then. One feature that is on the real life boat is kind of like the chute that they tip all the recently captured crab into, that sort of go via a sorting table into a chute, and they fall down into one of these tanks. So therefore I'm going to need to have a couple of crabs in the process of sort of being given a nice slide down into the tank. So I want them kind of breaching the surface of the deck through a hole So we can sort of see that they're going in that way and perhaps trying to escape that way as well. So what I want to build for this section is using a lot more plates to kind of make a round hole that has got crabs hanging out of it. And these tanks are all filled with water, of course, which I'm not really representing. But that water is to keep them alive, largely, because they're kept alive in those tanks until they reach the cannery. And this bit, I may add some water sort of sloshing out of the hole around its edges, just to sort of reflect the fact that there's a watery hole with a nice slide, a nice crab slide. Sounds a lot nicer than it is. Right, so here's the next stage. And it does look very messy at first, and that's just because I've used some odd colours like lime, because those bricks are just not going to be seen, so I'm using ones that are less useful in this hidden position. But if I start to fill them in with a 2x8 there and put my 8x8 plate as well back in position, you'll see that I've pretty much made a 4x4 square with just a sort of 1x1 overlapping bit underneath on each of the corners. And that's so I can put in this little structure, which is a 4x4 plate with the square hole in light bluish grey. And I've added to that lots of trans light blue tiles and one 1x2 plate in the same colour as well, which I can attach a crab to, and that's to represent the water that's sort of sloshed out of the tank. And I think I can drop that in so it's absolutely flush with the deck. So the water level is level with the deck and kind of splashes out. So I've just added a couple of splashes with 1x1 round plates in the same colour. And what I can do then, hopefully, is kind of put in a couple of crabs in the process of being transferred to the tank. So I'll put one there and then hopefully pin him in with another one, because that one's loose but at a nice angle, him stuck on the edge there. And I think that looks like they're sort of in the process of going in the hole on the way to the tank. So yeah, I think that looks really good actually. In fact, I really like that. So now we're going to have to do the rest of the whole fishing for crab process. And just so you know, roughly what I'm going to be doing. So the first stage is they bring up very large crab pots. So that'll be, about that big. And they kind of winch it up using a winch. So that's the first thing I'm going to have to make, which is called the block. And then it goes on, or is this the block? Anyway, it gets winched up and put on a great big flat hinged bit that kind of tips them back into the sea when they're being deployed and sits them and gives them a good shake to empty them when they're on the side of the boat, which is called the rail. Get my terminology right, I'll probably make a few errors. And then all those crab get sorted on a small table, which is called a sorting table, technical term there. And then the ones that are big enough to be caught get put in the hole of doom, and the ones that are not or bycatch get thrown back into the sea over the side. So I'm going to have to make each of those elements, and also, just so it really looks like a crab boat, have a couple of spare pots stacked up on this end, because at the beginning the whole boat would be full of crab pots, and then they'd be deploying them until there were no crab pots left on the boat, and then pick them up, put them back in, pick them up, pick them back in, until they've filled all their tanks, and then the last run they'll just be picking up all of their equipment. Right, so I think the most sensible thing to start with of what's left is definitely the crab pots themselves, because everything else is kind of going to be based on that. So I want to make a structure that's quite big that I can actually cram with loads and loads of crab as well, to show that they're actually being caught. So that's what I'm going to do next, and put this boat to one side. And here are my large crab pots. I think you'll agree they look rather fantastic. Now these are two empty ones, and they've got a big yellow buoy in them, B-U-O-Y. I know there are different pronunciations around the world, but we just pronounce it buoy. buoy, I think some people call them anyway. And you can see this is largely made out of Technic pieces. I've got the 2 long, or rather 3 long pins at each of the corners, and some Technic axles and so on to build a nice structure. I did try and build a sort of thinner one out of bar pieces, but it just gets very complicated, especially at the corners, because you need it to be going in 3 angles. And the fact that these are sort of a bit more chunky than they'd be in real life doesn't really matter, because I think they look great. Now, the netting, yep, it isn't Lego. I did try again with Lego netting. I wouldn't have had enough, but I did have a couple from the Arctic sets I've been buying relatively recently, which they've used there. And they're a lot finer holes, but with a lot thicker string. So in a way, they block sight a lot more than this. Also, they're just nowhere near big enough. So I'll probably need 2, 1 for each side, for each pot. And I want 2 empty ones and a full pot for my boat. So I'd need to get 2, 4, 6 as a minimum. And then I'd still need to tie them together with something. So I kind of gave up using authentic Lego pieces. Sorry for those purists who are going to say, tut tut, not real Lego. And I've used this netting, which is very cheap, sort of garden centre netting. And it's used to protect strawberries. And I have used some of it to protect my strawberries. I do grow some strawberries. And it's very fine, as you can see, and it's black. So I think it works rather well. And just to give it a bit of shape, I've done it around the all 4 corners, but I've done it underneath these sort of central bars. So it's all keeps its shape rather well. And then at the seam, I've basically, well, kind of crudely sewn it together by just sort of going round and round with a bit of black cotton and tying it off to end up with these. But I do think they look very accurate as to what they're supposed to be, especially with the buoy just loose inside, which is obviously captive, can't get out. And then the only thing left to mention is I've put on one of these pieces onto these 2, being one of those 1x2 plates with the kind of loop for a Technic piece in it. And that is so I can actually attach them to the deck. Now, I don't want that to be seen, but I do want it to be attached, because otherwise this is just going to roll around. It's not going to stand any chance of staying upright for longer than about 2 minutes. So what I thought I would do is, you see there, just push that down onto the deck, and now it's actually held. And the other one has got one, but on the opposite side. So when I put 2 of them together, hopefully that will clip on. There we go. They are actually attached. Won't fall off. How about that? So I really like that, especially with the yellow buoys in. I think that looks really good. So I need a third one, and the third one is full of loads of crab. So this one I like even more, just because it's absolutely ram-packed. So they're obviously doing well on their fishing trip. I've just put a whole handful of crab in there, and they're all trying to get out. So that's all good fun. And this one doesn't have one of those additional plate pieces, because it doesn't need to. This one is actually going to be loose, so it's technically like a play feature. You can kind of haul that up out of the sea onto the block, tip it up, tip out the crab, though maybe not actually tip out the crab, and then take the crab to the sorting table and to the tanks. So there we go. There's our next stage of the build, and I think this is looking great fun already. Now, the next thing I think I need to add is a bit of a lip to the edge of the boat, because at the moment it'd be very easy for somebody working on the deck to get thrown overboard, or even to trip on what is a sort of 2-stud high edge. So what I thought I'd do is add some panels, just do one high one on top of a plate on all of the edges, kind of like that. So it would add a bit of height along there. So I've got a great big long structure to add along this side. And the added benefit of that is that it actually makes the dark bluish grey kind of look like a nice stripe of detail, given I haven't got those stickers on the hull. So I do have a stripe after all. And then from the top, kind of looks like that. And I've got the corner ones at each of the ends. And that also allows me to put on a name for this boat. So I can use the SS Willie 6 long tile that's from the Steamboat Willie set 21317, which is of course Mickey Mouse in old sort of cartoon guise. I need that one for there, and I can do the other side in a minute because the other side's going to have a lot more kit on it. But I do think that name badge with the grey stripe actually works really well, and by the time it gets up here will be joining onto the wheelhouse, so it doesn't really have to join up with this, which would be a bit of a tricky angle to connect with anyway. So I think that's good. Right, so the first bit of hardware that I need to do is the bit that brings in the rope that's attached to our crab pot that's on the bottom of the sea, and it's kind of hanging over the edge and angled, so I've just made a little structure in red in a gap in the rail here with a turntable piece on the top just so I can have it at an angle. And what I've done is made this out of a Technic 4-long brick with a couple of these small wheels on the pins here, and then a half pin in the middle just to give it a bit of decor. And usually the rope sort of comes over the top of this one and under that one or something before it gets coiled up for future use in a barrel. So I thought that that would basically be like that, pretty low impact. And then the guy who's on the rail would be kind of here, and he would have a big hook that he uses to throw into the water to snag the rope that would be holding the pot to a buoy on the surface. So he would kind of hook that bit of rope and then put it through here where it'd tug, because this would be very long in reality, or this all the way up to the side of the boat where it'd be hanging like that. So he needs some controls, which I've just done very simply here with a couple of levers in blue for a contrasting colour. And this is lopsided because I'm actually going to have it attached to the edge of the boat there, and it's actually not going to be attached on this end, but I don't think that really matters. And these levers are what are going to be controlling the crane, because when it gets pulled up to this level, it then gets picked up by a crane that's attached to the boat to be dumped, to be opened. So there is our first bit, which is the block that brings up the pot. And just to show that, because I want a pot sort of in mid being brought up, I thought I'd add a barrel. So I've just got a dark barrel there, and I can put the end of this cord in there just loosely, because that can represent all the coiled rope that has been coiled up in the barrel. And this will be the buoy that's just resting on the deck of the ship because it's relating to the current crab pot. So that's that. So the next bit I need is the big sort of hinged table that launches the pots and brings them in. And then we can have the sorting table after that. Right, so I've left another gap in the rail and finished off the rest of it, which does look very nice. I think you'll agree. And I've left that gap to take what is the next bit, which is the hinged sort of launcher. And it's all in black, so it's a bit hard to show you, but I've got it on these hinged pieces that are sort of the ratcheted kind of ones with tiles underneath. So it's A, the right shape, and B, I've got this little raised area, so it can actually kind of hold one of the pots I've made with these pieces underneath as well, because I'm going to basically have it so this 2x4 square of tile kind of aligns with one of these holes and kind of roughly kind of grips it. And then with the cheese wedge pieces on the bottom and on the sides, it will kind of grip it to a degree. Now, not massively, but it's just not so it's not loose, but so it just won't fall off, you know, under a little shaking. Anyway, and that's so I can then add this to the side, and you can see it in full tip mode at the moment, but basically it will ratchet down to a flat position as well. So I can mount my crab pot on there, and you see it's pretty sturdy, it's not falling off. and then we can tip it into the sea. If it were empty, you wouldn't tip a full one in. So at the moment we've got it in flat position because we've actually just hauled up a pot full of crab, which is probably why this guy has got such a cheery expression on. Awesome. Right, so we're fast getting there. One of the things that you need to do is have some bait at this end, and that I'm going to represent with this yellow container full of fish, and that's because I do use fish as bait. Basically, they get a large cod and then sort of slice it up a bit so it becomes nice and smelly in the water, and all the crabs can smell it and sort of kind of wander into the crab net. So every time they empty one, they're also reloading it with bait. So that's what this guy can be doing. And he will be getting a fish from the bait store and putting it to reload the crab pot before it gets plonked back in. So that's a good job for him. Then something else I'll need over here is the sorting table. So for this, I've built a very simple table with kind of 4 sides. It's nowhere near big enough, but it'll have to do, with a couple of feet and kind of a little bit that hangs over as being the sort of chute that would drop the crab into the hold. So if I put that there, then I can also have another fisherman working at the table, and he's got a crab in one hand, and he's also got this, which is actually the handle from a bucket, but I'm just using it on its own because they have devices that look very similar to this actually to check the width of the crab, and if it's too small, i.e. this is bigger than the crab, then the crab is immature and needs to be thrown back into the sea to protect the fishery, and if it's bigger than the distance between these 2 prongs, then it's good enough and can be put in the hold. So he can be doing the sort process on the table. I'm having a little bit more along. There we go. So you can see exactly what he's doing. Maybe I'll tilt that as well. Yeah, so that looks good. So we've got the full process going on at the moment. Now, the one big thing that is missing at the moment still is the crane. So most of the workings is on this side at the moment with the block and the table and so on. But on the other side would be a smallish crane, and that's just big enough so it can kind of haul the crab from the side of the boat onto this table and give it a sort of shake, so it kind of shake into the table, which sorting table, which moves over to here to take the newly caught crab. So I've kind of very quickly built a little structure, so I can kind of put that on this side just to level up that weird edge, because we've got a bit of a lip on this side as well, and I've got a jumper plate in the middle just so I can angle a very sort of rudimentary crane, which I put this black and red striping on just as a good sort of colour combo to reflect the red here and some black that I'm going to use elsewhere. And although this boom isn't completely flexible, I could have made it fully out of those sort of jointed pieces. I think it's probably better just so it, does what it's supposed to do in reflecting a crane rather than being 100% automated. So there we go. So I figure that can be sort of hinged to get an empty pot hooked to the crane to drag it for deployment on this end, or to pick it up from the rail and bring it up to the launching table. So yeah, I think that looks pretty good. I think I need to pull out so you can see that a bit better. But otherwise, I'm really happy with this working boat. So now there's plenty of room for more fishermen, so we could probably have him working on the sorting table as well. Yeah, I'm thinking that looks rather good. Right, so there we are. From a slightly higher angle, you can see the crane a bit better. So it's quite rudimentary, but I kind of wanted it to be simple. I don't want it to block our view any more than necessary. I've also given this guy a knife so he can do that sort of cutting up of the fish kind of into ribbons a bit. I do love his little eyes over his beard. I think that's an old school Lego head, so it's being put to good use there. And I've given this guy one of the measuring sort of devices as well. That is a bucket handle and a crab, so he can get on with that as well. And because I've got a bit of an illness when it comes to collecting certain pieces, I've bought too many fishermen. So I've got one there and one here. And although you would never have an idle fisherman on a boat, it's better to have a really crowded boat, I think, than an undercrowded one. So I think that looks rather splendid as the back half of our boat. And we've obviously got our SS Willie sign on there, which isn't quite pushed down enough. There we are. So that's looking good as well. I've also got the tile, which is the date, but I'm going to use that on the wheelhouse, I think, on the front. So there's a bit of decoration spread out. And unfortunately, due to time constraints, I think I'm going to have to do the entire wheelhouse as a part 2. Sorry about that, but I think that would be great, having a nice tall wheelhouse here that you can get inside with our captain and loads of communication devices and all the rest of it, and access from this side as well, hopefully. So yeah, I think that'll be good, and then we can put it into Brick Nottingham next time as well. Awesome. So I think now we can summarize the whole fishing or crabbing process as being bringing in and deploying the crab pot from the side, which you can actually tilt and still keep the crab pot held on due to that tile we've got being proud there. Got the crane to move those around, and then the crab gets shaken onto the table where they use their measuring devices to tip them through the hatch into the hold, and you can see still all those wonderful crabs we did at the beginning through the slats in the hold, which I really like a great deal. And I put a lot more of those splashes on, you might have noticed, just to represent little puddles of water all over the place. So yeah, I think that's a real busy, bustling scene. Love it. So I think that represents a really good start to this crab fishing boat. I'm really pleased with it already, I must say. So do let me know what you think. If there's anything I've got wrong, probably all the naming terminology, but nonetheless, anything I could do better, that would be greatly appreciated. But otherwise, thank you very much for watching. It is appreciated. Do remember to like, comment and subscribe for more awesome LEGO videos. And next time on Robin Hood Bricks, well, I guess we better get on with finishing this bad boy. See you then!